Muted.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We're going to allow just a couple of minutes for the last few attendees to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get things started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar to explore FortiAP and the remote workforce. My name is Soraya Tati, and I am the Fortinet Secure Access Specialist covering the West Coast. And on the line with me today is our Senior Secure Access Engineer, Mr. Eric Scholhoff, who will be walking you through several use cases and deployment options with our FortiAP. For the sake of time, we ask that you send questions to the email addresses that you see on the screen. I have also inserted these addresses in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get back to you within 24 hours. So today we're working in a coronavirus world, which means that the employee is having to access company data from home. This sudden transition has not been the easiest of tasks, as IT professionals work around the clock to enable and secure their remote workforce. Meanwhile, hackers are capitalizing on these vulnerable device connections. Ultimately, we're left with the question on how are we able to provide secure access to those workers who are operating outside the boundaries of on-site IT security. And this is where Fortinet access points offer a secure, scalable solution that is easy to configure and manage, which Eric is going to tell you a little bit more about.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining
This is Eric Schulhoff. I'm a secure wireless and access technologies systems engineer with FortiAP out of the Southern California area. And our discussion today is on our remote access point products. And I'm going to go over both how the solution works and in addition, how to configure it. So I'm going to give configuration examples along with the theory examples of how it works. FortiAP has multiple remote access solutions. Some you're probably quite familiar with, and then some you might be less familiar with. On the familiarity side, you have the FortiClient, which is a VPN client that can run on a Windows machine or a mobile device that allows you to create a secure VPN connection back to your FortiGate. We also have small FortiGates that could be used in small office or home office environments that allow you to create a secure VPN tunnel back to a centralized FortiGate VPN concentrator. But then we also have a lesser known solution for the remote worker called the remote access point. With the remote access point, a FortiAccess point managed by a FortiGate can operate as an inexpensive VPN device that would allow devices behind it, both wirelessly connected to it, since it's an access point, or wired into it to create a secure VPN connection back to a centralized FortiGate. There's some clear benefits, of using the remote access point solution. A remote access point is very easy for the end user to deploy. It supports a zero-touch deployment to connect securely back to the network. Your end user doesn't need to launch a VPN client or do any configuration on the remote AP. It's lower cost and a simplified configuration and management versus sending out a similar small FortiGate to your end users. It supports a variety of devices behind it, both wired and wireless. It allows you the security of an encrypted connection and also to authenticate users that are behind the remote access point. Supports split tunneling and granular support of what traffic you want to send in the tunnel back to the FortiGate and what traffic you want to leave to access the internet directly or any networks you want to connect to locally. And this is all supported on all FortiGate models with no additional licensing. So the ability to control remote access points and manage access points is a core feature of the FortiGate, supported on every FortiGate model. What is a remote access point? Access points could be managed by any FortiGate as long as there is network connectivity between the FortiGate and the access point. Here on the right side of the screen, I have a FortiGate, which is at corporate headquarters. The bottom three access points have a direct connection directly to the FortiGate, and they're managed by the FortiGate. These are not remote access points. These are our local access points managed by the FortiGate. The three access points at the top of the screen, they're wired into a couple Forti switches that then connect back to the FortiGate. So these aren't remote access points either. While they're not directly connected to the FortiGate, they are connected to the FortiGate through a switch. The FortiGate has an interface directly on the network that those access points are connecting to. So those are not remote access points. Those are all examples of what we would call local access points. On the left side of the screen, I have a couple branch locations, which have 3 access points each. And then I have a home user who has a single access point. All these access points connect back to the FortiGate over the internet. So they're going through the cable modem or the DSL router, or maybe a FortiExtender LTE modem, back over the internet to the FortiGate. And these are all examples of a remote access point. So as long as the access point can communicate over any network back to the FortiGate, whether that is the internet or any other network, those access points can be managed by the FortiGate and are considered remote access points. What makes an access point a remote access point? Actually, all of our Forti access points support this functionality. So there are not any selection of Forti access points that are inherently remote access points. It's just an access point that is in a remote location being managed by the FortiGate. That's a remote access point. So we can do this with a typical access point like the one on the right, which is a FortiAP 221E. And this is the same access point you would hang on the ceiling or on the wall at your corporate headquarters. It's a dual radio access point, 2x2 in this case, and has a list price of $450. But we do have certain form factor access points that are better designed for the remote access point feature and bring some additional important features to the remote AP. And that is the access point that's highlighted on the left. That's a FortiAP C24JE. And this is what we call a wall jack style access point. So it comes with a wall jack mount that would allow you to mount it flush to a wall plate. These are commonly deployed in hospitality, in hotel rooms or dorm rooms, where they get mounted directly to the wall. But they also ship with a mounting bracket or a desk stand that allows you to simply sit the access point on a desk. And then you'll see on the bottom of the access point, there's multiple Ethernet ports. And this is really a key feature for the remote AP, is it allows you to both wirelessly connect remote devices to the access point, but also wire different devices in. This can be multiple PCs or even a voice over IP phone. So any device that you're going to have in the remote office or the small home office, and you want those devices on the network, they can connect whether they support a wireless interface or not. Getting started with a remote access point deployment, you need to select a Forti access point. In this presentation, we're going to be focusing on this FortiAP C24JE. That is our current recommendation for a remote access point, and that's the one we'll be using in all our examples in this presentation today. A couple other SKUs I have chosen to order along with my FortiAP C24JE is a power adapter. This access point can be powered by PoE. So if your end user had PoE available either from a switch in their network or their DSL router or an inline injector, you could power the access point from PoE. Otherwise, you can order an SP FAP 400PA, which is a wall plug power adapter to get power to the unit. Then the mounting bracket or that desk stand that you see in the picture below, that's a FAP-MNT-U24JEV, and those come in a 20 pack. So you'll be able to purchase a pack of 20 of those and then send those out with access points so that they can be stood up on a desk. Otherwise, they can just sit on a desk without needing the mounting bracket. Another option is a 40 deploy SKU, FDP single dash use, and we're going to discuss this a little bit, but the 40 deploy SKU allows for a zero touch, zero config deployment of your remote access points. On the FortiGate side, all FortiGates support this feature, the feature of being able to manage remote access points. If we are tunneling the SSIDs from the remote access point to the FortiGate, then you need to be aware of the tunnel mode managed FortiAP limitation on each on each FortiGate. And all that information is listed in all the data sheets for the FortiGates. We chose some examples here to show you how the ability to manage tunneled remote access points ramps up as you go from our medium size up to our largest FortiGates. For example, FortiGate 100E can manage 32 remote access points, a FortiGate 300E 256, and as you see, it ramps up from there. These are hard limits based on the hardware platform of your FortiGate, and this is not a feature, again, that needs any licensing or that you can license additional managed FortiAPs with by purchasing another license. It is set according to the hardware version of your FortiGate. What the remote office can look like with a remote access point is this. You have the internet connection, which is, in my example here, being brought into the office by an AT&T DSL modem box. Then I connect that to my Forti access point C24JE, and I can wirelessly connect devices to the SSIDs that I choose to broadcast from the remote access point. I can also wire in devices. In this case, I'm wiring in both a second laptop computer, and then I'm also wiring in a voice over IP phone, and that voice over IP phone is being powered by PoE out from my Forti access point. So there is a single PoE out power port on the FortiAP C24JE that will allow you to power up a voice over IP phone that's connected into the remote access point. A little bit about the zero config workflow and how the zero config and the access point deployment model works. There's no configuration needed on the access point itself, so you don't need to take the access points out of the box and do any configuration on them with the zero config workflow. So you simply ship the access point out to your remote worker. Your remote worker will unbox the access point, power it up with the power adapter that you've included, and connect the WAN port on the Forti access point into their DSL modem or their cable router, whatever they have. And when the access point boots up, it performs a self-discovery process. So the access point tries to figure out what type of access point it is. And there's several steps to this process. It sends out multicast and broadcast packets to the Ethernet, out its Ethernet port, to see if there's a FortiGate connected on the same broadcast domain that you've plugged the access point into. If it discovers a FortiGate, then it assumes that it's a FortiGate managed access point, and it'll automatically show up on that local FortiGate's interface for you to join it into the network. If it doesn't detect a local FortiGate, which a remote access point is not going to, it sends out a DHCP request to get an IP address from your network. That IP address or that DHCP offer could also include an IP address of a FortiGate. And if it receives with its DHCP offer the IP address of a FortiGate, then it will initiate a management connection to that FortiGate. But in this case, that is also not going to happen. So it's going to simply get an IP address, and the next step in its discovery process is it's going to contact FortiCloud. So it's going to contact Fortinet's FortiCloud. If you purchased the FortiDeploy single-use SKU with your remote Forti access points, what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you on FortiCloud to specify the IP address or the fully qualified domain name of your FortiGate that's going to manage these remote access points. Then when the access point, as part of its discovery process, contacts FortiCloud, FortiCloud replies to that access point with, here is the IP address of your FortiGate that's going to manage it. And that allows the access point then to bring up a management connection to the FortiGate. That management connection is a CAPWAP tunnel that is used for the management and configuration of the access point. And that by default is a DTLS encrypted management CAPWAP tunnel. And as you can see, that goes from the access point over the local network, over the cable modem or DSL router, out to the internet, all the way back to the FortiGate. Once that tunnel is established, then you can actually start managing and configuring your access point. Now, there is some configuration required on the FortiGate itself to allow that remote AP management and configuration. Typically, with remote APs, you're going to be managing those access points on the WAN 1 interface of the FortiGate. Now, that, of course, doesn't have to be a rule. You can use any interface on the FortiGate to bring in your internet connection, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'm using WAN 1 to manage the access points. What I need to do on the WAN 1 interface is I need to enable the security fabric connection on the WAN 1 interface. Now, this is a configuration that is not the default configuration for WAN 1. So you will need to go in and check that box that says security fabric connection. If you mouse over that configuration option, it'll tell you security fabric connection combines CAPWAP and FortiTelemetry. And it's that CAPWAP piece that we need to enable on that interface so that it will receive incoming CAPWAP tunnels from our remote access points. So we check that box, and then we have an option in the CLI to auto-authorize extension devices. And what this option does is this option, if we enable it, will automatically join any remote access points that connect to the FortiGate into the network with zero touch. If you don't enable the auto-authorize extension devices, then the devices will show up on the FortiGate, but they will require that the administrator right-click on them and authorize them to join them into the network. So there is an additional security piece there in manually doing it, but for the zero configuration option, we enable it, and then the access points get automatically authorized. You also will want to add the serial numbers of your remote access points into the FortiGate under your managed FortiAPs. Here in the top image, I go to create new managed access point, and I input the serial numbers of the remote access points that I'm sending out to my remote users. And then I also created a new AP group, and I called the AP group Remote APs, and I added the serial numbers of all my remote APs to the remote group. And what that allowed me to do is that allowed me to assign an access point profile that I use for my remote APs to the entire group of remote access points with a single click, instead of having to click on each remote access point and assign them the remote AP profile. In the remote access point profile, this is how I can define and determine how I want the remote access point to behave. So what SSIDs I want to broadcast on that remote access point. There's two different types of SSIDs that I can configure and that I can assign to a remote access point. I can do a bridged SSID, and on a bridged SSID, that's an SSID like any typical access point would broadcast, where the access point is just switching the wireless traffic from its wireless interface to its wired interface, and sending that traffic off to the Ethernet port. The other option, and the option that is typically associated with a remote access point, is a tunneled SSID. With a tunneled SSID, the access point puts all the wireless traffic for that SSID into a tunnel, and that tunnel terminates back at the FortiGate, whether that FortiGate is local or whether that is a centralized remote FortiGate. So all the traffic for that SSID goes in a tunnel from the access point to the FortiGate. What I can also configure in the access point profile is how I want the Ethernet ports on the access point to operate. As you saw in that previous slide, the FortiAP C24JE has multiple Ethernet ports, and I can configure each of those Ethernet ports individually to handle the traffic I want them to handle. What I configured here in this example is I configured port 1 as the Ethernet port that I'm going to connect my voice over IP phone into. What I'm doing on that port is I bridged to an SSID, and then I created an SSID called remote phone that represents the VoIP or the telephone network, and I set port 1 to bridge to SSID to the remote phone network. Port 2 is configured for a wired laptop, so a computer, not a phone. And on that one, I'm bridging to the SSID, which is the same SSID that I am broadcasting in the air for my wireless computers to connect to. So this way, a wirelessly associated device and a device plugged into port 2 are both joined and bridged into the same network. Once the FortiGate pushes out the access point profile and the SSIDs to the remote access point, an additional CAPWAP tunnel is created for the data traffic. And this tunnel can be DTLS encrypted, or it can be an IPsec encrypted tunnel. Both of those options are available. The default for the data tunnel is clear text though. So if you want to encrypt that traffic, you need to go in and configure that. That's done in the command line again on the FortiGate. And this is in the access point profile that we've created for the FAP C24JE. And you have the option to set the DTLS policy. Again, by default, it's going to be clear text, but you can set that to a DTLS or IPsec. IPsec, typically a higher performance option than doing DTLS. Another option for handling the traffic from the remote access point is we allow the ability to do split tunnel. What this split tunnel allows us to do is it allows us granular control over the data. The data that we want to send in the tunnel to the FortiGate at the remote end, we can put in the tunnel, but then we can also select subnets to exclude from the tunnel. In this example here, if you wanted internet traffic, so traffic going to Google or Yahoo, not to go in the tunnel back to the FortiGate, but to be directly sent out to the internet, that traffic can be left out of the tunnel. And also, for example, if you needed to print to the local printer that's wired to the DSL router along with the Forti access point, you could exclude the local subnet from the tunnel, and that traffic would also stay local. There's a great deal of flexibility in how to configure the split tunneling. It allows you the option to define subnets you don't want to put in the tunnel, or you can turn that around and only define certain subnets that you want to put in the tunnel and allow all the other data to stay outside of the tunnel. So this gives you very granular control, and you don't have to send all the traffic back to the FortiGate and your centralized network if you don't want to send all that traffic to that location. The solution, along with encryption, also allows you to do remote user authentication and authenticate users before they're allowed to pass traffic back to the FortiGate and through your network. There's a couple different ways we do this. It's handled in the IPv4 policy. What I can do here is my SSID that I'm broadcasting to the wireless devices on the remote access point, that can be a WPA2 enterprise SSID. So when the wireless device connects, it goes through a WPA2 enterprise. The user would be prompted to put in their domain credentials, their username and password, or you could use a certificate for that authentication. And then as that device authenticates back to maybe a FortiAuthenticator, which is connected to your FortiGate, the FortiAuthenticator will pass back the group membership of that user. And if that group membership comes back, in this example, being in my BYOD AD group, then that device is fully authenticated and able to pass traffic to the server network and out to my network. When I connect a wired device to that remote access point, of course, that WPA2 enterprise isn't going to apply to the wired device because that's a wireless protocol that's happening in the air between the access point and the wireless device. What's going to happen when the wired device tries to pass traffic through this policy, it's not going to be recognized as being in the BOYD-AD group. And what we can do in that case is we can pop up a captive portal. So we will redirect the user to the captive portal where they will get prompted to enter their username and password, which will then be authenticated back through FortiAuthenticator, very similar to the wireless user's experience. FortiAuthenticator will authenticate the device. It'll send back again the group membership, BYOD-AD, and then the wireless device will be able to pass traffic through the policy and to your network as well. Here's an example of what that looks like. We have the FortiAuthenticator in this case connected to the FortiGate. Wireless user does WPA2 enterprise. The wired user gets prompted for a username and password via a captive portal. Excuse me, and that is the remote access point solution for connecting, securely connecting with encryption and authentication and zero configuration, zero touch, your remote users back to your network using a remote Forti access point.
And thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We hope you found value in this information. If you have any questions or would like to schedule a time to discuss Fortinet secure access technologies a bit further, please send us an email and we'll respond within 24 hours. I hope everybody is staying safe and, more importantly, sane. Hope to see you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.